Okay, so here we are starting the tulips. I'm showing you the brilliant, brilliant yellow and orange and red that I used. I don't have the names for those I'll show you in the palette later, but yeah, there lots of pigment on my brush when I use these. And I always start out with the balance blend. The doTERRA essential oil just helps me to get grounded. And I think it's really important to just take a couple of minutes and just be here in the moment when you start to paint. So we're going to start with the background. As you can see, I'm putting lots of water on the background, just sort of working around the petals of the flowers. Now, from the picture, you notice that the flower does blend into the sky a little bit, but this is how we start out, is just moving the water around the tulips to, just sort of not really saturate the paper, but just get it nice and wet. And you have to move fairly quickly here because you want one side of the paper to be wet as well as the other side, so you can continue to just blend it all in. So I believe we use the phthalo blue for the sky, and it's a lovely, lovely sky blue. And you can see here I'm just using a paper towel to blot up the water. So you can see the palette there is I'm very lucky to have this palette. Everything is it's already mixed, so it's sort of fun to use. I don't have to do a lot of mixing. So I'm just splashing on the paint onto the wet paper and just blending it down through the stem, around the petal, just making sure that I give it sort of a mottled look. I don't want to have too much in the background. I want the tulips to be the focus, and the sky, can be a little bit of white, sort of just looking like it's a cloudy day. The sky isn't always a perfect shade of blue, but I chose to do more of a lighter shade. And so there's different parts of the paper. You can see it's a little bit darker, and I will continue to add more paint. But also I can add more water when I've got the paint on there. And I think, I always say it's really important to keep your background consistent from one side of the petal to the other, or one side of the stem to the other, because you want it to look like that is the background, not that you just sort of painted in between the stems, right? So just pay attention to the tone of the paint, and from one side to the other. Now we're also going to paint a little bit of green in the background behind the leaves and behind the stem. And so I'm just working around the leaves, and I'm going to blend the blue into the green. So the green at the bottom is going to be blended into the blue. And so I'll just work a little bit at making that consistent, and just sort of using a really nice fresh green. Of course, these are spring flowers, so the greens are really fresh, and I'm hoping that the sky is really blue for you. It tends to have such beautiful, vivid colors here in the spring. So, that's what you want, is to have that feeling of spring. So just use a really nice shade of green for the background and your leaves. And once your paper is wet, you can, just splash on the paint. It doesn't have to all be painted on. It sort of gives it a little bit of texture when you sort of sprinkle that paint on. And I'm just blending it in behind the petals, behind the leaves, so that the background is complete. I don't have to worry about it once I start painting those flowers. The sky and the green just sort of blend together, and they're touching the petals all around. And so here I am popping on the yellow at the top, and I've wet the petals, and so it spreads nicely, and outlining the different petals that spread out from the center of the flower. I wasn't quite sure when I made this design whether it would be well received, but everybody seemed to like it in the class, so I thought, well, I'll just give this video a look and see. And I think it does really help to understand how I did the flowers. I've put the orange in there while the paper is still wet, and so the yellow sort of comes down and blends with the orange, and then I outline the petals with just it's just sort of a little squiggly line. It's not straight, it's just a little squiggly, so it looks like it's lace almost. And I'm doing this when the paper is still wet. So if it seems to have dried, then just keep adding a little bit of water. I think that the secret here is to just see how that just sort of blends nicely because there's water on the paper. And sort of gives it an interesting shape at the top. And that's sort of what we want, is to sort of start spreading that out if you do want to have that design. And I think in class we probably left it to the end to spread it out, but this is how I did this one. And it's entirely up to you if you want to do the closed tulip or if you want to spread them out to the sky. But I think this sort of gives them real energy, and I think that's what we're seeing in the spring, is the real growth and the vibrant energy that flowers have. And so I'm just sort of playing with it while it's still wet. It's still very wet, and not pools of wet, but just enough to give me enough to blend things in. And I've played with the edges of the petals quite a bit to, sort of bring it to where I want it to be. Sometimes if the paper's wet, it blends out a little too much, and you can sort of see the lower petal. It's sort of got little dots in the petal, and I think I go back and make them a little bit more, lace-like. But I started to paint the sort of the outside edges of this tulip, and I was thinking, oh, this is just getting too big, and so I sort of just played with it. I didn't want to completely take it off. And then what you'll find later on is that I added another stem to make it look like there was another tulip, actual flower. So it ends up being three tulips. My original design was just two. So, you can sort of adapt and make things work however it is that it looks, always that composition you want to keep in mind. What is pleasing to the eye, right? Now you notice I use the side of my brush to sort of pull up a little bit of pigment. And the pigment is simply the color in the watercolor. And I sometimes use that interchangeably with watercolor. It's easier to say pigment, I think. But, you can use a cloth to pull the paint out of your brush. Or you can, just pull it out and put it in water and put clean water onto your work, and then pull that paint up. And this way it sort of gives it this, very light color. You don't have the full color when you pull up what you've put down. And I love this way of highlighting areas, and I think for the flower it just makes it look more like it's see-through almost, right? So which a lot of flowers are, and especially tulips, daffodils, they're almost so delicate you could see through them. So just trying to play around and just keep playing with it to get those petals to look separate and to get that see-through look. And I'm just continuing to outline the petal lines that I've drawn with my pencil. And we talked earlier about, whether you should take those pencil lines out before you put your watercolor on. And I think sometimes it helps to accent. We don't always cover up the pencil lines, but sometimes we sort of need those pencil lines to finish the continuation of what we've got with the color. And one of the things that we talked about was getting a pencil that you can draw with, but when you apply watercolor paint or even the water to it, the pencil dissolves. So you sort of have to know ahead of time and remember where that line is if that's what you're looking for. And I think that I will look for one next time I'm in the art store, just to give that a go. So you can see sort of it's blended nicely between the yellow and the orange, and a little bit of reddish tones as well. But lots of pigment on my brush, as I mentioned. And I'm just starting to do the stems and the leaves, and just remember what the actual stems look like for the tulips are quite robust and strong, very round and perfect looking, and so you want to remember that. And I think in hindsight, I sort of played with these leaves a little bit too much, but because it's sort of the same way with the leaves of tulips. They're very vibrant and fresh and spring-like, and sort of smooth. A few lines going through them upward, and now I'm just sort of shading the stems to make them look like they're not all the same color. You want to have a little bit of variety there, so you just keep playing with it, and always remember that the lower part and where it meets is usually the darkest area, so you want to put more layers on those areas. You want to use sort of round strokes to make it look like it's round, and then look at where your highlights are, and that's where you can pick up the pigment. That's where I'm doing right there, just picking it up right where that curve is, and it's on the top of the leaf. So I'm just dabbing up a little bit of the red paint that has come down into the stem. You want to make sure your flower is dry before you take the color of the stem up to meet it. And just talking about shadows and that sort of thing, the portion of the stem that is directly below the flower is going to be the darkest as well. And so I'm just filling in color here, trying to give it some contour shape by keeping that lower part of the leaf a little bit darker and the upper part a little bit lighter. And the leaves of tulips are nice and sort of fat and full, just sort of lush and really ripe with those colors. And so we just want to add a little bit more pigment to bring that out. And I think that, just sort of, as I mentioned, the cross way brush strokes will help to bring out the round shape of the leaves. Now, in hindsight, I think that the stems of these tulips are a little bit short. I think I probably could have put them a little further up on the paper with longer stems. And so that's why it's really important to really look at your design first before you start putting paint on the paper. Make sure that the design, the composition, it's exactly sitting where you want it to be, because you can't change it once you start painting. And so just finishing up, putting a little bit more green on the stems. So this is where I decided to put in another stem, just to make it look like there was another flower in there. I was just looking a little too big for what I liked. And I started putting a little bit of green into the bottom of the petals. And, when you look at a tulip, it's not exactly that way. So, but I think it sort of helps to make it look more together. You don't want your stem to just be into nothingness. You want to have a little bit of darkness where the stem meets the flower. And so just filling in a little bit more of the stem, adding more color, just playing with those contours a little bit more. So here I'm just adding a little bit more color to the leaves. I want them to stand out from the background, and I'm going to be adding a little bit more into the background as well. But the leaves have a few straight upward lines towards the tip, and sort of adding a little bit more tones and shadow to the stems. As you layer on, each one gets a little bit darker. And here I've gone back to the flowers, just sort of really helping to make those petal edges stand out a little bit more with a finer brush now. And I believe the paper is still a little bit wet, but so it's just enough to blend it in. And I love the way that the yellow and the orange and the red look so brilliant together. So different tones that are created within those three colors. Perfect for the tulips. And just sort of finishing up, bringing things out a little bit more. Just really adding in those finishing touches. You come to a point where you don't want to go any further. You've done enough, and you don't want to keep working it. You come to a point where it's like, okay, this is enough. I need to let this be done now. Just adding a little bit more color in there, making it a little bit more vivid. You want things to stand out. You want things to be sort of finished and complete. We're not blending in the leaves to the background, so you want to finish those the way you want them. And then we'll move on to how we're going to sort of blend those flowers out a little bit more. And also the background of the green. So there I'm just picking things up a little bit with the smaller brush. So what we're doing is adding a little bit of water to the back and then adding some more green. And what I'm doing is sort of giving the shape of the leaf to the background. So upward strokes and just sort of leaving the illusion that there are leaves in the background. And so, I mean, it doesn't really matter. You don't have perspective of the ground or the grass or anything. It's just the background that you want to make a little bit interesting. And of course, this makes the leaves stand out too when you've got just a little bit of a blur in the back of what we imagine to be leaves. So I'm just making that tone consistent across the work behind the stems. So this is where we're going to add a bit of water now, clean water, to the tops of the tulips, and I've turned the page around to start bringing that down a little bit. And it doesn't really matter what you start with, the shades and water and tones and everything will start to drip down as you add more color, add more water. Just sort of give it that look of energy that is so wonderful this time of year. And I was happy with that, and then I thought, well, let's put some sprinkles on it. So what I do is load my brush up and just hold one of the brushes as a cross brush to add the sprinkles, and that's pretty much it for our spring tulips.